Neural resonance 120 and rising. We have core activity. Increase to 500 megahertz. Subject is conscious. Security, it's the alarm. We have a situation. Subject is dangerous. Close all exits.
Hi, and welcome to our video review for Headhunter for the PlayStation 2. Now, this game actually started out as a Dreamcast game, and Acclaim, the company who's publishing the game in North America, picked up the rights to the game, kind of like how it did Crazy Taxi, and then brought the code over to the PlayStation 2. Now, along with that comes a lot of problems that are associated with ports, but at the same time, it's a shame that this game wasn't released for the Dreamcast, because it's pretty darn cool. The game itself is split up into kind of two different sections of gameplay. You have your third-person action shooting gameplay, and then you have parts of the game where you're actually riding a motorcycle and going from place to place. Now, the shooting part of the game is actually very similar to Winback, and that game was released for the N64 and then later for the PlayStation 2. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of hiding behind crates and popping out and shooting the enemies, and sometimes you'll get up and you'll roll and get to that next box and set yourself up there again. And at the same time, it also has a lot of gameplay elements that are similar to Metal Gear Solid, in that you have a radar, you can see your enemies, you can actually see what direction your enemies are facing. And what you want to do is you want to take advantage of that so that when they turn their backs, you sneak up behind them and then you can do a stealth kill. And what that is you just grab them by the head and you give it a quick twist and it breaks their neck. And that's kind of cool, and those two styles actually blend really well together. Now, the puzzles of the game are very similar to what you've seen in Resident Evil before, and basically what that means is that you collect a lot of items. And as you collect those items, you build them up in your inventory, and you may not quite know what they're for, but later on down the road, you'll stumble into something and you'll be like, oh, that's what it's used for. But at the same time, this kind of puzzle solving also facilitates a lot of backtracking. So there's a lot of times that you'll find an item, you won't know what to do with it, but later on you realize, oh, I have to take it over to this other building and use it somewhere else. So it's not as bad as Resident Evil in that you'll get 8 or 9 different items and you're kind of like juggling them, wondering what you're supposed to do with them. But you have 3 or 4 at a time, and there are times where you definitely kind of wonder what's going on and you're doing a lot of backtracking from one place to another. Now, the motorcycle sections of the game, they're a necessary evil, but at the same time I wouldn't say they're really needed in the game. And I mean, it's kind of cool that you can hop in your ride and you can go from one location to another, but your exploration is kind of stifled by the fact that you can't get off your motorcycle unless you get to the exact building you need to go to. So it's cool that you ride your bike from one section to another, but at the same time it doesn't supply you that freedom that you get from, say, like a Grand Theft Auto 3. Now, in either the shooting or the motorcycle riding sections of the game, at the first half of the game, you're going to have to go through some license tests. Even if you decide to bypass the traditional training mode, you're going to have to go through some training throughout the game. And what you do is you go to these VR missions, and if you've ever played the Metal Gear Solid VR missions, then you kind of know what to expect. Basically, you have empty environments, and the characters are kind of wireframe. They don't really have the textures put onto their bodies. But what it does is it teaches you the ins and outs of the game. It shows you how to sneak up behind enemies and perform your stealth kills. It shows you how to use empty shell casings to lure the enemies to different parts of the level where it's easier to maybe take them out. And it does help you come to grips with the game and the way the gameplay mechanics work. But at the same time, they're actually kind of more difficult than the rest of the game. So a lot of times I found the hardest part of the game was getting through the VR missions. And it's the same deal for the motorcycle. The first half of the game, you have to learn how to ride the motorcycle by accumulating points. Well, you get points by reaching top speed with your motorcycle. So what you do is you find a straightaway where there's no other cars, and you have going back and forth up and down the straightaway. So it's kind of cool that you get to use the motorcycle to go from one location to another, but at the same time it's made kind of pointless because you can basically abuse the feature and get the points wherever you need them. Overall, I'd say that the gameplay in Headhunter is excellent. When you first hear about all the different styles of gameplay mixed together, you may think, well, man, how are they going to pull that off? But in the end, they do manage to pull it off, and it comes off as a cohesive experience. So I think they did a really good job of blending all the different styles of gameplay into one good game. Where graphics are concerned, Headhunter for the PlayStation 2 is basically a straight port from the Dreamcast. So a lot of the problems associated with straight ports come along with it, especially for the PlayStation 2. For instance, you're going to have you have blurry textures. Some of the textures will actually jitter a little bit. The polygonal models haven't been upgraded at all, so the characters don't have separate fingers. They just kind of have flaps for hands, and you don't get any real-time facial animation in the game. And when you're playing the motorcycle levels, there's lots of draw in. You'll see parts of like the buildings drawing in. So a lot of the things that came along with the Dreamcast port are present in this game, and they haven't been fixed. The one thing that has been kind of fixed when compared to the Dreamcast version is the camera. Now in the Dreamcast version, it would often get stuck on objects, and while it does happen in the PlayStation 2 version of the game, it's definitely nowhere near as prevalent as it was before. Overall, if you're expecting a graphical tour de force from Headhunter for the PlayStation 2, you're definitely going to be sorely disappointed. But at the same time, the game was one of the better looking Dreamcast games, and it's kind of cool to see this game run on the PlayStation 2 and realize that the Dreamcast wasn't out of its league compared to the other consoles. So while there are definitely some drawbacks, the game looks good enough that it's not going to be distracting. Overall, I'd have to say that Headhunter is definitely worth a strong look. If you haven't noticed it right now, we're going through kind of a software drought, and little action games like this are a perfect remedy for that. The different gameplay styles blend together to make one great cohesive game. The graphics aren't great, but they're definitely workable, and I think the whole style of game will appeal to most people. So if you're into checking out a new action game, Headhunter should definitely be on your list, although for some people it might be a good idea to rent first.
Whoa, big man with an EMP gun. I got your number, Headhunter. They told me about you.
Maybe you can share sometime.
You won't live long enough.